Welcome back to the county seat. We are talking about affordable housing across the state. This is the discussion part of the show. We hope you're up to speed on how broad this problem actually is, and with Utah being one of the more expensive places to buy houses in the country right now, it's time for a discussion. Joining us for a conversation, Tara Rollins, who is the Executive Director of the Utah Housing Coalition, and from Grand County, to show that this problem is statewide, Vice Chair of the Grand County Council, Curtis Wells. Thanks you for joining us. Curtis, thanks for making a long trip up here.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
You bet. Okay, let's talk about how much of the swath of the income bracket housing affects. Obviously, you've got super low income housing, which most people think of as subsidies and assistance and city reimbursed housing. But how broad is it actually?
Well, when you think about extremely low income people, that is somebody who's making a little less than $12 an hour. And that's what we're talking with service jobs. We have a lot of jobs at that level. So that is 30% of area median income. So that's not even talking about people that are on disability. So it's a huge problem.
So how far up that payment ladder? Obviously, we saw some examples of using median salaries in different places like Grand County, where you're about $300,000, you're almost $400,000 in Davis County as your median. And of course, as the median rises, the available houses at the bottom end of that bracket starts to shrink too. Is it literally a problem that could affect prosperity?
Absolutely. One of the biggest issues is that, you know, the ability to put units on the ground is here and our growth is here. And so we're not keeping up with our growth that we have coming into our state, and as well as keeping up with the growth that comes from our state. And so that's really hurting the market. I think about, you know, areas like yours and the expense of construction and the ability to get people to actually work in your area just drives the cost up even more. And so not having the right inventory for the incomes that we have in our state is a huge issue.
So how big of a problem are you currently having? Because I imagine that Escalante is not too far behind you because they've become a recreation center, and that places that rely heavily on tourism like Grand County has now become. Even San Juan County is going to have this problem. Are you actually not able to expand business because you can't get seasonal employees? It's
a primary hurdle for businesses, you know, and for the county. You know, larger than 80% of our economy is tourism, and where supply is not keeping up with demand, it's creating a lot of issues. The average income in Grand County for a household is $56,000. The average median sales price for a home is $329,000. That was in 2017. And so the problem is that the gap is actually widening. Growth is not keeping up, you know, in terms of inventory with the need for employees and workforce housing.
So who's buying all the houses?
Well, in Moab and in Grand County, it's second homeowners, vacation homes, you know, on the topper end of the scale. And that's where the attention and the demand is for construction companies and investment in Moab. And so all the new growth and supply in housing is not for the working class people.
So eventually all the people who come to recreate are going to price the people that make that possible out of the marketplace, and then they can't do any of the fun stuff they like. Then what happens?
Well, it's a very serious problem because what we're talking about is upward mobility. You know, for most Americans, their opportunity to climb the economic ladder is equity in a home. And if we can't bridge that gap, you know, you become like other similar tourist economies where you have a transient workforce and the folks that they serve, and it becomes a hollow community without that healthy workforce in the core.
Yeah, go ahead.
I think another issue is that, you know, I really feel the state needs to do better preparation, because we spend $22 million on advertising for tourism, and so that's to bring people to our state, but yet we're not working on the infrastructure that is needed to make sure that people have a good time. And I think sometimes we're not asking the right questions. You know, whose bottom lines are gonna hurt if we don't have housing? Well, right now, I bet you your bike shops down there do not have the bike mechanics that are needed to be able to rent the bikes on a consistent basis. Well, that's going to hurt some of the bigger companies that their bikes are down there. So like Trek, Cannondale, look at the Razor, look at the four-wheel drive. I mean, all those, they need the support system. So why aren't we asking the question, how can you partner with us to make sure our community is whole and your bottom line is strong too?
Yeah, so one of the biggest issues here, at least in Grant County, is we're roughly 95% public land. And so there really is a limited amount of developable land within the Moab Valley. And so the businesses, the private sector, they're going to react and respond and provide housing for their employees when they have to. And that's happening in Moab. We're seeing that. It's still not going to mitigate the solution for the entire community. And so we're in an exercise now, we're exploring what options do we have as a public sector, as a community, to help mitigate the problem.
So the average person would drive into Moab and they'd look at the area north of the airport and they say, geez, there's all kinds of land out here. Why can't you build a subdivision out here? You're saying that land's not available.
Correct. Yeah, that's federal land, some Sitla land, but primarily it's federal land, public land.
Do you think that the answer is getting provisions to the BLM to start disposing of land again?
Well, I would absolutely be in favor of that, to create some social utility, on the land for the community, because this housing issue affects so many different, elements of our community. I would be in favor of that, absolutely.
So that doesn't solve a problem with Davis County, who has maybe that much BLM land in it. What do you do along the Wasatch Front?
I think when once again, I'm going to go back to my example of, Cannondale. I mean, they're not going to build the housing. They're going to help through their foundations. Most corporations have a foundation that they can donate to. And so if we were to set up something in the state to help facilitate that, like the Only Walker Housing Loan Fund could help developers down in Moab, but it will come through like Cannondale or anything. But Davis County is the same thing. You got to look at what their assets are up there. Who are the corporations? Where are the jobs? And then go and have the conversation. I think one of the items that we don't talk about is that we are very heavily with education as well. And so we have universities that are straining our housing because they don't have student housing. And you look at the example of what's happening down in his area, there's a campus going in, and how much housing is being planned by that university to make that happen.
But doesn't this work better? I mean, asking companies to create a foundation to
support. They have foundations.
Yeah, but I mean, asking companies to contribute to a fund just so that people can buy more expensive housing, that's one side of the policy. But I've heard people talking about deed restrictions and price controls and things like that. How do you incentivize that within a free enterprise system and keep it, help make sure that there's that upward mobile path that you were talking about, Curtis, and still maintain a free enterprise system and give some kind of incentive to builders to start building houses that he's not going to make as much money on, but he's still going to make a profit? What do you do?
Well, there's lots of developers in our state that are doing just that, but it's driven by tax credits. And there's only a limited amount of tax credits that we receive from the IRS, each state. And so how do we supplement that type of incentive, as well as, bonus densities, zoning? I mean, there's some definite things that are being talked about right now that could help that. But right now, the market's not working because of the supply. We can't get units on the ground fast enough. And so when you're looking at supplement and rents, I would be happy as a corporation if I had a foundation to help, bring people to Moab. And if that means, housing people that are going to be the mechanic for the season, and then the next season that housing is going to be available to somebody else, it's the workforce that is important.
Do either one of you think it's going to reach a point where companies are going to start looking at it and saying, I don't want to build here, I don't want to expand here, either in tourism or in some kind of industry, because I'm going to have I won't get an employee base that short of having to commute 70 miles to get here? I mean, is that a scenario that might work?
Well, one of the concerns that I have, and some of the options that we've laid out and we're looking at, and we've done a Moab area affordable housing plan. Some staff in Grand County's worked very hard on that. The Moab Area Housing Task Force, which is a joint study group between the city and the county. And assured housing policies is something that we're looking at. And really what that is it's a formula, and it's to set a limit where, say, if a hotel or a large business is coming in to open up a hotel or one of these large businesses in the community, that they don't dump those demands on the community, and that there's some assurances that there's going to be a housing component to the development. And my opinion is those can be touchy things, because on one hand, you don't want to create an unhealthy business climate, because developers and business people, they have the luxury of going and developing elsewhere. And so I'm always a fan of the carrot and incentives, and that's what you were alluding to, is what can we do to keep a healthy business climate but incentivize these kinds of developments. And so in Grand County, one of the biggest challenges is that we're relying on a tourism economy, and counties aren't structured to generate revenue from tourism as well as cities. So we do collect a transient room tax. There is a formula that goes back into the promotion of tourism that is important. We don't want to lose our market share. We're proud of what we've built, but it creates heavy demands on a county, that's operating through a property tax system. And so, being spread thin, how do we solve these problems? And so one thing that, while we're not cash rich, and we have our demands for our services are high because we have millions of tourists coming through a small community of less than 10,000 people, what we do own is land. The county owns land. And so something that the Grand County is looking at right now is, if we can close that gap to make a project pencil up by providing the land piece in an equation, how do we structure a public-private partnership with the developers so that those units can come online in the market? And we've done our job to implement, that utility for the people.
Well, we've covered a lot here, and we've run out of time. So I'm going to invite you at home to join us on our Facebook page, or more particularly our YouTube channel, because we're going to continue this conversation there for a few more minutes. We thank you for participating. We'll be right back with some closing thoughts here on the county seat in just a minute.